Let's go over factoring out the greatest common factor. So we might have this expression x squared plus 5x. And we may need to factor this. Well, one thing we do is factor out the greatest common factor. The coefficient here is 1, and over here is 5. So the greatest common factor of 1 and 5 is just 1. Factoring out is not going to help us at all because when we divide each term by 1, we have the same exact expression. But we can actually factor out the variable x. Here we have x squared, and here we have x. So that means this could be divided by x, and this could be divided by x. So we could take an x out. And when we factor, we actually divide out whatever the greatest common factor is. Factoring undoes multiplication. So the opposite of multiplication is division. When we find the greatest common factor, we divide it out of each term. So we have x squared divided by x is just x. We subtract the exponents. And then 5x divided by x would just be 5. Because 5 divided by 1, the coefficient in front of the x is 5. X divided by x, they cancel out, or x divided by x is actually 1. So we just have 5 times 1. And that gives us 5. And we can see if we would actually multiply these, we should end up with x squared plus 5x. So we distribute the x to both terms. X times x is x squared. And x times 5 is 5x. Okay, let's look at a more complex example. 3y to the 4th plus 6y cubed plus 12y squared. First, let's figure out what the greatest common factor is of the coefficients. So 3, 6, and 12. The number that goes into all of them, the biggest number that goes into all of them, is 3. Now for the variables. We have y to the 4th, y cubed, and y squared. Here's a little trick. The greatest common factor of the variables, so in this case of the y's, is going to be the smallest exponent, the term with the smallest exponent. So y squared goes into all of them. That's what we'll take out. The variable with the smallest exponent. So now we'll just divide each term by 3y squared. 3y to the 4th divided by 3y squared. 3 divided by 3 is 1. We don't have to write that. Y to the 4th divided by y squared. Subtract the exponents, we have y squared. Next we have 6y cubed divided by 3y squared. 6 divided by 3 is positive 2. And y cubed divided by y squared is y to the 1st, or simply y. Okay, last term, 12y squared divided by 3y squared. 12 divided by 3 is 4. Y squared divided by y squared. They cancel out. It's 2 minus 2 is 0. Y to the 0 is 1. Anything to the 0 power is 1. Or you just think of them as canceling each other out. And we end up with 3y squared times y squared plus 2y plus 4. Let's try an even more complicated example. 8 x cubed y squared plus 24 x to the 4th y minus 20 x squared y squared. So again, we'll start with the coefficients. What's the greatest common factor of 8, 24, and 20? That's 4. Now we see each of these terms have an x in it. So we just look at what's the smallest exponent. 3, 4, 2. Smallest exponent is 2, so that's what we're going to factor out. Now let's look at the y terms, the y variable. Y squared, y to the first, y squared. The smallest exponent is 1, so we're going to factor out y to the first, or just y. And now we're going to divide each of these terms by this greatest common factor. 8 divided by 4 is 2. X cubed divided by x squared is x. We'll subtract exponents. Y squared divided by y to the first is just y to the first, or y. Okay, next term, 24 divided by 4 is positive 6. X to the fourth divided by x squared is x squared. Y divided by y, again, they cancel out, or y to the first, 1 minus 1 is 0. Anything to the 0 power is 1. So we just have a 1 there. So 6x squared times 1, again, just the same exact term. Okay, last term here, negative 20x squared y squared divided by 4x squared y. Negative 20 divided by 4 is negative 5. X squared divided by x squared, they cancel. Y squared divided by y, y to the first, or just simply y. So to recap, when we're factoring out the greatest common factor, we have to find the greatest common factor of each of the coefficients. Then we see what variables are in common. So in a second example, each one had a y in it. And we just factor out a y with the exponent of the smallest exponent. So 2 is the smallest exponent, so we factored out y squared. In this one for the variables, they each had an x and a y. So we looked at the x's. There was x cubed, x to the fourth, x squared. The 2 here for x squared is the smallest exponent, so we factored out x squared. Then each term also had a y. We had y squared, y to the first, and y squared. The smallest exponent is the 1 that's written right here. Doesn't have to be written, it exists. So that's what we factored out 1y, y to the first. And we just divide each term by the greatest common factor, and we get a monomial times a polynomial, the monomial being the greatest common factor, the GCF.